Hello, Polly Palmer in London.
Hi there.
How you doing today, Polly?
All right, yes. As I said before, it's nice and sunny. I got my shorts on. I look like your average pom in the white legs.
That's great. Well, we're here to talk about, your career, but we're going to concentrate on the Blossom Toes. And according to my research, that you spent a year with the Blossom Toes. But firstly, Polly, I want to ask you how, because you're John Palmer, how did you get the nickname Polly?
Well, it's a mist of time, really. I don't really know how it started.
You can't even remember?
No, it might have been from school, being Palmer, I don't really know. And I don't really know how it suddenly sort of got spelt how it did. I think probably it was a conscious effort to get away from parrots, but it seemed to be, that was in family, I think it started getting spelt like that, because everybody's name in family was no Y's but I's for some reason. But there you go. But I don't really know how it started. But when I moved to London, I tried to get rid of it. I thought, what a horrible nickname to have. And, of course, it's helpful because people remember it rather than John,
Does family call you John or Polly?
Well, a bit of both, really. And it's quite strange in this sort of, now at this sort of time in thing, when I'm sort of surfing on the internet, I use my real name to be sort of, to hide, as it were, which is quite, about face, isn't it?
Don't be distressed, because in the 1960s, one of the most important and influential footballers, this is Australian rules, his name was Graham Farmer, but he was always called Polly Farmer.
Really?
He's one of the most famous Australian footballers because he changed the way the game was played.
Really?
And
what about Australian rules football?
Australian rules football. Yeah. You're not
so
alone.
I'm not alone then?
You're not alone, but I think his was spelt with a Y.
Yeah.
Anyway, Polly, let's get on to music. What got you listening to music in the first place? Was that as a young child?
I don't really know. I suppose really, in a way, I'm from the era where, there was no telly, so people there was sort of evening family soirees around the piano, and my whole family sort of played piano really bad, if you know what I mean. And the toy drum kit, and I think I started playing that when I was very young, and then went on. As I say, I'm from an era when everybody sort of learned to play the piano and sort of, had piles of music in the sort of in the music, in the piano stall, and that's how it all started, I suppose.
And when did you pick up the vibes?
I went to lessons when I suppose I must have been still at school, to a local, jazz guy, and. He used to, you have lessons, and he doubled on vibes, which is, in those days, was a natural double for anybody in the jazz sort of scene, a lot of jazz players doubled it. So he used to sort of say, right, well, let's play so-and-so, and he'd sort of play vibes, and I'd look at this and go, well, I've got a great instrument, So I was determined I was going to play vibes sooner or later, And it's strange because that guy is a brilliant drummer, and I never even sort of got close to his playing, but I became a better vibes player than him. But there you go. Everybody has their particular forte, don't they?
And the world is full of ironies too.
Yes.
Polly, the first band that I managed to find while I was surfing on the internet was the Hellions?
That's right. Well, this was I come from Worcester, which is it's about 30 miles south of Birmingham. It's West Midlands.
What accent is that then?
That's actually, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Archers on the BBC radio, which is a sort of soap that's been running for about 50 years, and my accent is very much the Archers. It's sort of the West Midlands, West Country is West Midlands.
I used to watch a show called Star Soccer here in the 70s, and it was hosted by Hugh Johns and Billy Wright.
Oh, yes.
And they had a similar accent, obviously. They were always from the Midlands.
It's little farming with just a tang of Birmingham, actually, is what I suppose, if you wanted to be, Pygmalion about it.
So tell us about the Hellions.
Yes, well, that was my first band. In fact, it was my first pro band, and believe it or not, I went, and the bass player of that band, which is, 40 years ago at least, rang me up, and he keeps a pub in a little tiny village, and I went and played with him about a fortnight ago, and that was something else, trying to remember stuff you did 40 years ago. But anyway, that band was with Dave Mason and Jim Capaldi, and the Hellions then became Deep Feeling. And we made a few little records. So the Deep Feeling was doing a lot of sort of psychedelia and stuff like that. I'm not sure whether any of that I think some of it got released, but I wouldn't know where to look. But anyway, that band stayed for about 2 or 3 years, and that was the first band that was playing all original material. And of course then Jim Capaldi and Dave Mason formed Traffic. And so I eventually, the actual record label, of course, that Deep Feeling was on, was Marmalade Records, Giorgio Gamalski. And so he had a vacancy for drums in the Blossom Toes and rang me up and he sort of said, come down and have a rehearsal. And basically I didn't go home. I came down for the day for an audition and stayed in London for, well, until now, sort of thing, basically.
So obviously you got along with Jim and the Bryans.
Yes, that's right. I mean, it was the days of the music was in some ways separate from the, you either clicked or you didn't, and there was a nice sympathetico. In fact, the previous drummer he went on to do something else, and we were all living in one big, huge house, as one did in those days, with about 3 bands in there.
Jim was telling us it was the place to be for parties.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, it was literally I think about 20 yards from Chelsea football ground. But it was also because through Giorgio and through all the people, there was a lot of people came through. You'd sort of get up in the morning, walk in, and there'd be sort of Tim Hardin, or there'd be Captain Beefheart sort of sat in the front room playing. And it's as the sort of arrogance of youth. You think this is normal. But afterwards, there's amazing thing. You think, why didn't I have the tape recorder running and these sort of things? But yes, it was definitely, there was a lot of partying going on there. Yeah.
Was it a happy time for you in the Blossom Toes there, Poli?
Yes, it was really. It was, as I say, I was the drummer, but I was sort of playing a little bit of bad flute, and I was playing some vibes as well. I had them sort of set at the side, so quiet interludes, I'd sort of stand up and sort of play something else. To be honest with you, the reason why I left, it wasn't Giorgio so much as, I mean, he did. I have to say, he did open my musical experience quite a bit. A lot of South American music, and stuff that I'd never heard of. And but in a way, I found Giorgio is a wonderful character, but it was all a bit all-encompassing. You think I must think for myself a little bit. So although it was a great band, and I left on the best of terms with, and of course I played with Jim much later, as well. But I just felt a little bit cramped in style,
Well, Poli, one of my favourite Blossom Toes tracks is Everyone's Leaving Me Now. And what I was saying to Jim was that Blossom Toes released 2 albums, totally different. One in, that sort of whimsical psychedelia, and the other one in progressive rock. They were both very, very good of its type. Suggested, the Blossom Toes, they're really good at anything they could do. And you've got this single that you wrote was sort of like a jazzy sort of thing. And
I mean, if I haven't heard it for decades, to be honest, but it was an original thing. It was, although it sounds nothing like it, it was a bit of a sort of a mental sort of breakdown type of thing, a bit sort of like Peggy Lee's You Can't Play in My Backyard, type of. That was the idea of it. It just sounds depressing to me now, but whatever, I mean, we all had sort of little things, and Jim, was a talented lad, and Brian Godin was a very unusual guitarist, 2 of them actually, Wishbone Ash now have got this sort of double guitar thing, but they were basically doing this sort of harmony guitar thing long before, I think Spirit were doing it. There was a band called Spirit, you remember Randy California?
You mentioned them, yeah.
And he used to double track his guitar so that he did the harmony guitar, but they used to do that, and it was the first band that was 2 guys playing harmony sort of bends, as it were. That was very good. That was very good, sort of thing. Yeah. It was some great things I do remember about Blossom Toes. Is Giorgio, one thing he used to each band and each act he had was totally different. He had sort of Julie Driscoll, he had Blossoms, he had Chris Barber's jazz band, he had John McLaughlin, Davy Graham, who was an excellent, I don't know if you've heard of him, he's an excellent singer, a folky sort of guitarist. All different people.
And the Yardbirds, of course.
But although I don't think he actually handled, I think he sort of got pipped at the post, really. I think he put them together, but I'm not sure whether he was sort of pipped by somebody else and was taken off his hands. I'm not sure on that, to be honest.
I'm led to believe that he did have him for a while until...
Well, weird. I'm sure he did, and think, in fact, the For Your Love, and that, I'm sure his mark of, his sort of musical mark.
I just remember the name. Simon Napier Bell, that's the guy who took over.
That's right. As I say, Giorgio used to insist on everybody going to one another's gigs, so I can remember doing the Middle Earth which was a huge sort of rave, I suppose you could call it by today's thing, all-nighter in Covent Garden. And we'd sort of finished, and our last number would have sort of Chris Barber and Julie Driscoll all jamming on the stage, and the sort of people going, what's that trombone player playing in this band for, But that was the type of sort of situation that used to happen.
Did you go on any of those Paris trips?
Oh, yes, I did. We did a huge, big Marmalade spectacular at Olympia, and we did that. I can remember doing that because we had a huge orchestra, and I forget, and perhaps I should forget, the guy who was MD in it, because he went out for a very good liquid lunch and came back paralytic. And one of the trombone players who was sort of sat there, they were behind some tabs, and we were supposed to start, and it was one of the Blossoms which tune I forget, but it starts with flute, very, very high, and I mean almost beyond my capabilities, and there was this drunken MD, and eventually one of the trombone players stood up and sort of conducted it, but it was one of those sort of moments that you really wish the floor would open.
Was that a big auditorium, the Olympia, Polly?
That was, yes, it was the auditorium, I think that was, yes.
After the Blossom Toes, I've got here a band called Eclection.
That's right, but it was very short-lived, actually. It was they had a sort of contractual thing, so when I was with them, they did an album, but they didn't do any recording while I was with them. It was the first band that, it was a folky, sort of folk rock band sort of thing, as those were very popular, as you know, at the time. It was the first band I didn't play drums on, because there was a guy called Jerry Conway they had on drums, and I was just playing a bit of keys and, what I did in family, really. Trevor Lucas, you know Trevor Lucas?
The Australian?
Yes, I mean, he was married to Sandy Denny, who's an Aussie, of course. He was the bass player, and there was a girl called a woman called Doris Henderson, black American gal.
Kerry Lee Mail, was she in the band at the time?
I don't think so. Not in my. Well, I was there, and it might have been after the event. But the other one was a guy called George Holtgreen, who was, I think he was Norwegian come French Canadian, which is a strange combination. So it was really an eclection of nationalities, really. But and a guy called Gary Boyle, who's a jazz guitarist.
You just played a few live gigs with them, Polly? Or?
Well, we used to gig quite a bit, that did, yeah. But as I say, there was no recording because they were in the, there was one of those things where I think it was Electra or something like that, and they didn't want to record them, but they didn't want to let them go, The guy, I forget the guy thing, but he was a guitarist come trumpeter, the guy that I replaced, but what his name was, I can't remember.
Polly then led into, of course, Family, which you had a few years there with old Roger Chapman. How was Roger to work with?
Well, I mean, he's a very feisty guy, very sort of spiky guy, but...
we spoke to him a few weeks ago on the show, and I think he's mellowed, perhaps.
Well, yeah, I mean, we all mellow, don't we? I mean, as you get closer to your bus pass, you mellow out. Yeah. You either have to... Well, I think as well, if you want to keep going in the music business, you've got to more and more rely on your God's given rather than your force of personality, if you know what I mean. No, I mean, I worked with him not only in... I was, 3.5 years, something like that, with Family, and then then he toured in Germany and did a lot of good stuff in Germany, album-wise, and he had a band called The Shortlist that backed him in those, and I was in 4 or 5 of those albums I did with him, and all the touring as well. So all through, I suppose, late 70s to late 80s, I was touring with Roger.
The reason why we spoke with Roger is got a 4 CD box set with there's a lot of shortlist material. Actually, it's a 5 CD box set, and there's a lot of shortlist material. There's a lot of Roger stuff from the 80s as well. So
he had some great bands, actually, really good players. And of course, the thing is he is,
yourself
people
as well.
tend to think of the Larry the Lamb sort of voice, but he is a great blues shouter. He really is a good blues shouter. We used to do some cracking another time when the computer, when the tape recorder should have been on. When we were doing a lot of tours in Germany, if we bumped into a Cocker, they always got on really well together, and they always used to sort of, in the best, in the nicest way, try and sort of get on one another's gigs and try and sort of sing one another off the stage, But as I say, in the nicest way. I don't mean in a negative way. They really go for it, and it was, something to hear, the pair of them soaring away,
The audience's ears would have been bleeding after them two together. Polly, look, I've got here that in 1974 you scored a rock opera called Hero.
That's right, in Oz, yes.
For the Sydney Opera. Was it to do with the opening or something? Or?
No, I forget. No, there was a new guy. I mean, it's all a bit vague. There was a guy, it was actually two Aussies that wrote it. I mean, the opera itself, it sort of did a fortnight or 3 weeks or something like that and died in the bum. So it was a guy called Craig McGregor, who's a journo in Sydney. I think it was the Sydney, is it the Morning Herald?
I think it's the Morning Herald.
Yeah, something like that. He was there, and then he was sort of teaching. He'd written quite a few, books and stuff. And there was also a guy, he wrote the libretto, and then there was a guy called Don Henderson, who was a folky sort of thing, who was living over here at the time. He wrote the lyrics, and I did the music, and it was sort of a year, and I was in Sydney for about 4 months, trying to sort that out. But as I say, I actually occasionally have a little listen to that, and there's some good stuff there, but as I say, it's the way it is. It bums on seats, and if you don't get them, it folds.
That showbiz. How did they get hold of you, or was it because Don was living in
it was a weird sort of thing, because Don Henderson was living in a little place in Sussex, very sort of small little village, which also a mate of mine was living down there, and I went down to a barbie, and there was Craig and Don Henderson were both there, and we sort of they said, "Oh, do you want to fancy doing this?" So I said, "Yeah, it sounds like a good idea," and that was it. It's quite strange how you meet up people under weird sort of circumstances, isn't it?
How did you enjoy Sydney, Polly?
Lovely. It was, unfortunately, I'd like to have seen a lot more of Oz, but
they kept you busy.
I wanted to do so much, and then I just, your head's in the thing, and you just in music, and it was unfortunately a 9 to 5 for all that time.
Have you been back at all?
I haven't, no, but as I say, I've got some nephews over in Sydney, and sort of they keep saying, "Well, why aren't you here? It's lovely over here," and I go, "Yeah, I know," but then another little project turns up, you put it off.
Speaking of Germany, an album you did, Human Error.
Oh, that's right. It was a German label. It was a computer label. There was another Aussie thing, of course, the Fairlight computer, which was a very expensive toy in the sort of those 70s and 80s. I was working as an engineer at that time, and which the actual studio had 2 of them, and so this German label said, "Look, do you fancy doing something? It has to be a little bit on the weird side, sort of, computer music." So I did it in downtime, in between everybody else coming into the studio, basically. In retrospect, you listen, you go, "Oh, that was good," and that was horrible. I tend not to listen to a lot of stuff.
I haven't heard it. What sort of music is it?
It's basically computer-generated music, and this is like pre-sort of samplers and MIDI and stuff like that. But it's with sort of a few good players, just so, sort of that's the human error part of it, you see. There's a couple of vibe solos on it, and there's a couple of horn solos from different people, and a couple of guitarists, on there. So they're sort of soloing above what I've computer generated, basically.
Is that still available?
I don't know.
It would have been one of the first of that type, wouldn't it?
Well, there was other sort of things. This was a little bit towards the jazz, as you could probably guess. Some of the other German artists. You could probably do a search. It's the record company would probably be Erdenklang, which is ERDENKLANG, and that would probably be a German, so it'd be .de. So you could probably check that out and see if that's still, or it'll give you a clue at least,
Polly, I want to go into a band, Chuck Farley.
Oh, blimey, yes, them, have you?
Well, Chuck, is that Charlie, as in Charlie Farley?
Well, no, it's a sort of, because we're on air, it's an actual, you'd have to, if you reverse the first letters, it's actually what it means. Really.
Oh, I see.
I'm not sure, it was Mr. Time thing again as well, but I think it's something to do with when Prince Charles got married, I think is what it's about. But I don't know. But, I mean, it was just a name is a name is a name, isn't it? But it was a guy called, in fact, I'm doing a little duet with him tomorrow, a guy called Steve Simpson, who's a lovely player. He sort of played with Ronnie Lane years ago, and he had a lovely band called Meal Ticket as well. He's a very good guitarist and singer, and plays a bit of fiddle, plays, all the sort of banjo, mandolins, all those sort of things. And he actually works with Chapo's Shortlist at the moment, right at the moment, actually, with him. It was his band, and then there was all different guys, from other bands, basically, we'd sort of toured together. So there was a guy called Jeff Whitehorn on guitar. Buzz Burrell was the bass player, who's from Bad Company. And myself. Lately, there was a guy called Pat Crumley, who's a sax player, who's, very good jazz sax player over here, But basically, I think we did a sort of a limited edition album in the mid-80s, but basically it was a pub band. We just come away from tour, and then the best thing to do is to get in front the 50 people in the local pub, you know. It's a sort of good antithesis to it all, you know.
Yeah.
Know what I mean? When you can get the problem with touring, it's you get a bit childish with people, and you know what I mean. You get a bit self-centred, and it's nice to be brought back to somebody with a pint in their hand, going, "Go on, impress me." And they're about sort of 3 foot from your face, you know, and it brings you back to earth and teaches you what your reason why you were doing it all in the first place, you know.
There used to be, I remember as a kid, 2 Ronnies episode, and one of the characters that Ronnie Corbett played was Charlie Farley, B.A.
Oh, yes, that's right, yes, I forgot about that, yeah.
Piggy Malone and Charlie Farley, B.A., which I think B.A. stood for bloody awful.
Yes, that's right, yes, I forgot about that.
I think it was called Done to Death, a little like a murder mystery. So,
That's it, I remember it, yeah.
So what are you up to at the moment? Just playing with Steve Simpson there, Poli?
Playing is not so much, you know, I don't do so much playing, you know, occasionally one a week maybe, where it used to be sort of 4 a week, you know, but I sort of sit in front of a computer mainly these days and do music for BBC cartoons, you know, stuff like that. What I'm actually doing, I've just done a little sort of mood jazz album, which is, I'm not quite sure what's happening with that, but I've just finished mastering it. But what I'm doing right at the moment is writing with Pete Sinfield from the
King Crimson,
the lyricist from
King Crimson.
King Crimson, of course, yeah, an ELP, yeah. We actually wrote about 6 or 7 things in the mid-80s, and was sort of a little bit left field, and the sort of publishers went, "Oh, no, I can't do anything with that." And so the tapes got dust, and then Pete sort of decided that he's going to make his second sort of solo album, and so we're sort of re-recording them, basically.
Has Pete Sinfield ever been not left of field?
Sorry?
Has Pete Sinfield ever not been left of field?
Well, it's strange, because from that particular time, I mean, you probably remember that sort of, you know, side of him, but he has become a sort of almost, well, he hasn't become, he's still, you know, he's done sort of a lot of middle-of-the-road sort of, well, that's the wrong term, but, you know, pop sort of lyrics. And in fact, I mean, I think he's written a couple of European Vision Song Contest lyrics.
Does he put that on his resume, I wonder?
Well, I don't expect so, but he has, you know. I mean, he just, you know, the thing is, it's the same with everybody else. You do one thing, but then after a while, you become a jobbing lyric writer or a jobbing musician, you know. And, you know, you get to the point, basically, where music, you know, a gig is a gig, and it doesn't really matter what, you don't think, oh, I don't play that sort of thing, or I don't write that sort of thing. You just go for it, and you think, well, I should have learnt enough now to be able to do something in the style of anything that anybody throws at me, basically.
It's a business too, isn't it?
Well, that's right. But I mean, the bottom line is as well is it is a business, but you can still enjoy it all, you know. I mean, there's a lot of, you know, my contemporaries, and I sort of go, "What you're doing?" and they're sort of minicab driving, and you think, well, at least I'm not doing that. You know, nothing wrong with minicab driving, I hasten to add, but everything I do, it doesn't matter. Some of the music might be, as I say, for children's television, but it's still music, and you can still enjoy making of that music.
Jim mentioned that Brian Godding isn't in the music industry, so unfortunately, and that's why he's been...
Yeah, that's a shame. As I say, unfortunately, I couldn't get hold of anybody who... I mean, there was about a year ago, somebody mentioned Brian Godding, and I can't remember who it was, but they sort of, I said, "Oh, well, pass my best on to them," you know, and he went, "I will," but who it was, I can't remember, you know.
Well, it's a shame he's not in the industry.
That's right, because he had a very unusual style of guitar playing, very unusual.
And a good songwriter, too. And
that's right, yes, that's right, and... I think, and Brian Balshaw, I think he was a sort of his family were market traders, so I think that's what he's doing. But I might be wrong. But you know, I haven't heard anything of them for years and years and years and years.
So as long as they're still alive, that's the important thing.
Yeah, well, hopefully, yes, that's it.
Yeah, unfortunately, we spoke to Noel Redding a few months ago, and
yes, you were saying by email. Yeah, it's a shame. I used to know Noel, not well, but I used to have a. Well, Mitch Mitchell moved into my flat in Fulham when we both split up with our old ladies, and he said, "Do you mind if I just, you know," because he was living out of town. Yeah, come in. So he stayed for about 4 or 5 years. So Mitch nearly put a band together with Rick Gretsch, but it never sort of happened. But anyway, so I used to see Noel because Noel was always sort of come to see Mitch, and he was always a very nice lad. I thought Noel was a really nice man. Yeah,
yeah, on the few conversations that he had, he came across as a nice man, and of course Rick Gretsch has sadly gone as well.
Yes, that's right, yes.
Yeah. But anyway, Polly, not finishing on a melancholy note. You're in fine health yourself, so that's all right.
Yes, well, yes, I'm still, I'm growing more rounder and fatter, but healthy, but just staying healthy.
Well,
anyway.
you've got to keep away from those computers, I think.
I think this is it, mate. This is it. Well, I'm not a jogger, unfortunately, but I've got to do something to keep away from the sedentary life.
We're having problems here in Australia. We're one of the most obese. We've got problems.
Well, yes, I mean...
It's the kids, too.
There's a problem. I think the worst thing that was ever invented was the TV zapper, wasn't it?
Polly, got to leave it there. We're out of time. Thanks very much for taking time to talk to us. And,
no problem, and thanks very much, Nick.
Yep, reminiscing about the Blossom Toes. And
I remembered more than I thought I would, to be honest.
That's great. And they're still remembered, too. The two albums and the singles that they put out, you're part of it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, look, I think they've stood the test of time. Otherwise, we wouldn't be wasting our time.
Yes, this is it.
Calling you and...
So I shouldn't be too embarrassed then.
No, certainly not. All right, Polly, all the best to you.
All right, nice talking to you, mate.
Okay.
Take care, mate.
Bye.
Bye now.